Mike Tyson dropped to his knees on the cold veterinary floor, wrapping both arms around the neck of his 400-pound Bengal tiger as the massive cat's labored breathing rattled against his chest. The veterinarian prepared the final syringe, stepped forward, then froze, staring at something beneath Tyson's grip that made her drop the needle entirely. What happened in the next 48 hours would become one of boxing and veterinary legend, a story whispered about for decades. Mike Tyson dropped to his knees on the cold concrete floor of his Las Vegas compound and wrapped both arms around a 400-pound Bengal tiger that could barely lift its head. The animal's breathing came in shallow, ragged pulls, each one weaker than the last, and Tyson pressed his forehead against the tiger's neck and held on like the whole world was trying to pull them apart. What happened in the next 72 hours would become one of the strangest, most emotional stories ever whispered about in the world of exotic animal ownership. A tale that started with a dying tiger, a grieving former champion, and a veterinarian who noticed something nobody else caught. Something shocking. Something that changed everything. But let me take you back. Not far. Just enough. Tyson had owned big cats for years. Everyone knew that. You saw the photos, the interviews, the famous scene from The Hangover. People laughed about it. Late-night hosts cracked jokes. But here's what nobody tells you. Tyson didn't keep those tigers as props. He didn't parade them around for cameras. At least not after the early years. By the time this story takes place, Tyson had settled into a different relationship with these animals entirely. He fed them himself. He sat with them for hours. He talked to them in a low voice that nobody outside his inner circle ever heard. And of all the big cats that passed through his life, one mattered more than any other: Kenya. Kenya was a female Bengal tiger Tyson had raised from a cub. She came to him small enough to hold in two hands, eyes barely open, fur still damp from birth. He bottle-fed her. He slept next to her crate during her first weeks because she cried through the night, and the only thing that calmed her down was his hand resting against the wire. This was a man who had knocked out grown men in seconds, a man who terrified people just by walking into a room, sitting cross-legged on a tile floor at 3 in the morning, feeding warm milk to a baby tiger through a rubber nipple. Kenya grew. She grew fast. Within 2 years, she was nearly full-sized, muscular, golden, dangerous to anyone who didn't know her. But she knew Tyson. She knew his footsteps. She knew his scent. When he walked into the enclosure, she would press her massive skull against his chest and hold it there. Not playing, not hunting, just leaning into him. Tyson said once in an interview that Kenya was the only living thing on Earth that never wanted anything from him except his presence. Think about that. This was a man who had been surrounded his entire life by people who wanted his money, his fame, his power, his downfall. And the one creature that just wanted him to stand there and breathe was a tiger. Believe me, that bond was real. Now, let me move this forward. Kenya was roughly 15 years old when she started slowing down. Tigers in captivity can live into their late teens, sometimes early 20s, but Kenya had always been a big eater, a big mover, and her body had taken the toll. Tyson noticed it first in the way she walked. Her back legs weren't tracking right. She'd take a step and her hind paw would drag, just slightly, just enough. He called his veterinarian, a guy named Dr. Marcus Webb, who had been caring for Tyson's animals for nearly a decade. Webb came out, did a full exam, and told Tyson what he didn't want to hear. Kenya had significant kidney deterioration. Her blood work was off. Her liver enzymes were climbing. She was, in clinical terms, entering organ failure. Tyson stood there in the enclosure with his hands at his sides, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on Kenya. He didn't say anything for a long time. Webb later said it was one of the most uncomfortable silences he'd ever experienced, not because Tyson was angry, because the pain on his face was so raw that Webb had to look away. "How long?" Tyson finally asked. Webb told him weeks, maybe less. There were treatments they could try, fluid therapy, diet changes, supplements. But Webb was honest. He said these were measures that might buy time but wouldn't reverse anything. The organs were failing. The trajectory was set. Tyson knelt beside Kenya and put his hand on her rib cage. He could feel her breathing. Still strong enough then, still present. He told Webb to do everything available. Cost didn't matter. Comfort mattered. He wanted Kenya comfortable. Over the next 3 weeks, Tyson barely left the compound. Get this. Here was a man with business meetings, podcast obligations, public appearances booked across the country. He canceled all of it. His team scrambled to rearrange schedules. His manager called him 6 times in one day, and Tyson picked up once, said, "I'm not leaving," and hung up. He slept on a cot he dragged into the building adjacent to Kenya's enclosure. He woke up every few hours to check on her. He brought her food by hand, small portions of raw chicken and beef that Webb recommended for easier digestion. Most days, Kenya ate a little. Some days she didn't eat at all, and Tyson would just sit with her. He'd press his back against the enclosure wall, Kenya lying a few feet away, and he'd talk. About what? Nobody knows exactly. His handlers gave him space. But one of his security team members, a guy named Darren who'd been with Tyson for years, said he walked past one evening and heard Tyson talking softly about Customato, his old trainer. The man who raised him, believed in him, made him into a champion. Cuss had died before Tyson ever won the heavyweight title. And here was Tyson, decades later, telling a dying tiger about the man who saved his life. I swear this happened. The decline accelerated during week 3. Kenya stopped eating entirely. She stopped standing. She'd lift her head when Tyson came in, and her tail would twitch, a faint acknowledgement, but that was all she could manage. Webb came for daily visits now. The blood work worsened every time. Kidney values were off the charts. Her body was shutting down system by system. Webb pulled Tyson aside on a Thursday afternoon. They stood outside the enclosure, the desert sun baking the asphalt around them, and Webb laid it out plainly. Kenya was suffering. The pain management they were using wasn't keeping up with the deterioration. Her quality of life had dropped below the threshold where any ethical veterinarian could justify prolonging things. It was time to discuss euthanasia. Tyson's whole body changed. His shoulders pulled up, his hands balled into fists at his sides, not aggressive, defensive. This was a man bracing for a hit he couldn't dodge. Not yet, he said. Webb started to explain why waiting would only increase suffering. Tyson cut him off. I said not yet. Webb nodded. He didn't push. He'd known Tyson long enough to understand that this wasn't stubbornness or denial. This was grief arriving ahead of schedule, and the man needed a minute to stand in it. But Webb was worried about something else now, something he hadn't mentioned to Tyson yet. During his last 2 examinations of Kenya, he'd noticed physical indicators that didn't align perfectly with standard organ failure. Subtle things. A pattern in her gum coloration. The specific way her abdomen felt during palpation. An unusual reading in one of her blood panels that didn't match the kidney profile. Webb was a meticulous vet. He kept detailed notes, and when he compared his findings across the last 3 visits, a different picture started forming. One that made him sit up straight in his truck on the drive home. Now here's where the story turns. Here's the part that makes this more than a sad tale about a man and his dying tiger. Webb went home that Thursday night and pulled out his veterinary references. He cross-checked Kenya's symptoms against a condition that's rare in big cats but not unheard of. Pyometra, an infection of the uterus. It can mimic organ failure in its advanced stages. The toxins flood the bloodstream, hammer the kidneys, destroy liver function. But the critical difference is this. Pyometra, even in its late stages, is treatable. It requires emergency surgery. It's high risk, especially in an older animal. But it's not the same death sentence as true multi-organ failure. Webb ran the numbers again. He looked at the white blood cell counts. He reviewed the abdominal distension he'd noted but attributed to fluid retention. He thought about the fever pattern, the way it spiked and dropped unpredictably, which was more consistent with an infectious process than with organs simply giving out. His hands were shaking when he picked up the phone. It was almost midnight. He called Tyson directly. Tyson picked up on the second ring because of course he was awake. He was sitting with Kenya. Mike, I need to come out there tomorrow morning. First thing, I need to bring an ultrasound machine. Tyson's voice was flat, exhausted. Why? Because I think I might have been wrong about what's killing her. Listen to me. In the world of veterinary medicine, especially exotic animal veterinary medicine, misdiagnosis happens more often than anyone admits. Big cats are not dogs. Their physiology is different. Their stress responses mask symptoms. They hide pain in ways that confuse even experienced practitioners. and Kenya had been presenting a textbook case of renal failure. Everything pointed there. But sometimes textbook cases are lying to you, and the truth is hiding behind a symptom you dismissed because it seemed like it fit the obvious answer. Webb arrived at Tyson's compound at 6 in the morning. He brought a portable ultrasound unit and a veterinary technician named Carla, who specialized in exotic animal imaging. Tyson was already in the enclosure with Kenya. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were swollen. His shirt was wrinkled. He had a damp cloth and was wiping Kenya's face with it, gentle, steady strokes across her forehead and around her ears. Webb set up the ultrasound. Tyson helped hold Kenya still, though at this point she barely had the energy to resist anything. Webb pressed the probe against Kenya's abdomen and stared at the screen, and then his breath caught. "There," he said to Carla. He pointed at the screen. "You see that?" Carla leaned in. Her eyebrows went up. Tyson looked between them. What is it?" Webb turned to face him. "Mike, her uterus is massively enlarged. It's full of fluid, infected fluid. This is pyometra. This is what's been poisoning her system." Tyson stared at him. "So it's not her kidneys?" "Her kidneys are damaged, yes. But they're damaged because of this. The infection has been dumping toxins into her blood for weeks. That's what's been destroying her organ function. If we remove the infected uterus, if we get the source out, there's a chance her kidneys recover. There's a chance her liver comes back. No guarantees, but there's a chance." Tyson grabbed Webb by both shoulders. Not hard, but firmly, and he looked him dead in the face. "Then do it. Right now. Today." Webb took a breath. He explained that the surgery was serious. Kenya was weak. Anesthesia alone on a debilitated 400-pound tiger was dangerous. The surgery itself could take hours. Complications could arise. And even if everything went perfectly, there was no guarantee Kenya's organs hadn't crossed a point of no return. Tyson didn't flinch. "She dies on that table trying to live, or she dies on this floor giving up. That's not even a choice. Do it." And right there, I need you to understand something about Mike Tyson. This man had been counted out more times than anyone in the history of sports. He'd been bankrupt. He'd been imprisoned. He'd been humiliated on national television. He'd bitten a man's ear off in the ring and become a global punchline. And every single time, he fought back. Not gracefully, not cleanly, but he fought. And now he was fighting for a tiger who couldn't fight for herself. No way I'm making this up. Webb made calls. He assembled a surgical team in under 4 hours. An exotic animal surgeon named Dr. Lena Patel flew in from a wildlife facility in San Diego. She had performed pyometra surgeries on big cats before, though never on one this compromised. A second veterinary technician and an anesthesiologist who specialized in large exotic carnivores rounded out the team. They converted a section of Tyson's compound into a makeshift operating theater. Stainless steel tables were brought in. Equipment was sterilized. IV lines were prepared. Kenya was sedated at 2 in the afternoon. Tyson helped carry her onto the table. 4 people, plus Tyson, lifting this massive, beautiful, dying animal onto a steel surface under bright lights. Tyson's hands were shaking, but his grip never loosened. Before they put her fully under, Tyson leaned down and pressed his forehead against Kenya's one more time. He whispered something. Nobody in the room heard what it was. Then he stepped back. Dr. Patel scrubbed in. The anesthesia team got Kenya's breathing stabilized on a ventilator, and they opened her up. What they found inside confirmed everything Webb suspected, and then some. Kenya's uterus was grotesquely enlarged, filled with nearly 3 liters of infected pus. The organ had been essentially rotting inside her for what Patel estimated was at least 6 to 8 weeks. The toxins pouring from this infection had been systematically poisoning her bloodstream, overloading her kidneys, inflaming her liver, suppressing her appetite. Every symptom they'd attributed to old age and organ failure had actually been caused by this one treatable condition. Patel removed the uterus. The surgery took 3.5 hours. There were 2 moments during the procedure when Kenya's blood pressure dropped dangerously and the anesthesiologist had to intervene. There was a point where bleeding from an abdominal vessel required emergency cauterization. It was tense, start to finish. The surgical team worked without speaking unless absolutely necessary. The only sounds were monitors beeping, instruments clicking, and the low hum of the ventilator keeping Kenya alive. Tyson waited outside. He paced. He sat down. He stood up. He paced again. Darren, his security guy, brought him water twice. Tyson didn't drink it either time. He just held the bottle and kept walking back and forth along the same 20-foot stretch of concrete. At 5:45 in the afternoon, Dr. Patel came out. She pulled off her surgical cap. Her scrubs were spotted with blood. She looked drained, and then she nodded. "She's alive. The surgery went as well as we could have hoped. The source of the infection is out. Now we wait and see if her body can recover." Tyson sat down on the concrete. Right there. Just dropped. Not because his legs gave out, because the weight he'd been carrying for weeks finally had somewhere to go. He put his face in his hands and his shoulders shook, and every single person standing there looked at the ground or the sky or anywhere else because Mike Tyson was crying and nobody felt like they had the right to watch. This is what people don't understand about this man. The world saw a fighter, a knockout artist, a menace, and all of that was real. But underneath every bit of it was a kid from Brownsville who learned early that everything he loved would be taken from him, and who spent his whole life fighting that lesson, refusing to accept it, raging against it. And now here he was, not in a ring, not on a stage, but on a concrete floor in the desert heat, fighting for a tiger's life because she was the one thing in his world that loved him without conditions. Trust me on this. The next 48 hours were critical. Kenya was moved to a padded recovery area. IV antibiotics flooded her system. Fluid therapy supported her kidneys. Webb and Patel took turns monitoring her vitals around the clock. Tyson didn't leave. He brought his cot into the recovery area and slept in 15-minute intervals, waking every time a monitor beeped differently or Kenya made a sound. The first sign of hope came 18 hours post-surgery. Kenya's white blood cell count, which had been astronomically high, dropped. Not a lot, but the direction was right. Her body was responding to the removal of the infection source. Webb showed Tyson the lab results on a printout and pointed to the number. "This is good," Webb said. "This is her body saying it wants to fight." Tyson looked at the paper. He didn't understand the numbers, but he understood the word fight. By hour 36, Kenya opened her eyes and tracked movement in the room. When Tyson walked past her, her head turned to follow him. That was the moment. That was the decisive shift. Not a dramatic scene, not a movie climax, just a sick tiger turning her head to watch the man she trusted walk across a room. But it meant her brain was clearing. The toxins were receding. She was coming back. By hour 48, Kenya attempted to stand. She didn't make it. Her legs buckled and she went down on her side. But the attempt mattered more than the result. Webb and Patel exchanged a look that contained more optimism than any words could have managed. And then, on day 4 post-surgery, something happened that broke everyone in the room. Kenya stood up. She was wobbly. She was weak. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in a month. But she was on all 4 legs, standing under her own power, and she took 2 shaky steps toward Tyson, who was kneeling at the edge of her recovery space. She reached him and pressed her head against his chest. That same gesture she'd done 1,000 times over 15 years. That lean, that pressure, that silent statement of connection that didn't need language or logic or explanation. Tyson wrapped his arms around her neck and held her. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The room was quiet, and nobody broke that silence because it was sacred, and everyone present knew it. Dr. Webb stood in the doorway watching and had to take off his glasses and wipe his eyes. Here was a man who had practiced veterinary medicine for 25 years, who had seen animals live and die in every conceivable way, standing in a converted building on a former boxing champion's property, watching a tiger he had nearly euthanized nuzzle the most feared man on the planet. And the most feared man on the planet was on his knees, holding that tiger with a gentleness that defied every public image ever created of him. You can't write this stuff, except it happened. Over the following weeks, Kenya's recovery exceeded every projection. Her kidney values improved steadily. Not all the way back to normal. There was permanent damage, but functional. Her liver enzymes normalized almost completely. Her appetite returned. By week 2, she was eating full portions of raw meat. By week 3, she was walking the length of her enclosure without stumbling. By week 4, she swatted at a ball Tyson rolled toward her, and the speed of her paw strike made Webb instinctively step backward. "She's back," Webb said. shaking his head and half laughing. Tyson looked at him. She never left. That's the quiet power line. 5 words. Under 15. And it landed hard enough to rearrange the air in the room, so I'm going to let it sit right there and not explain it. Now, the fallout of this story matters because it changed several things at once. First, it changed veterinary protocol for big cat organ failure cases. Dr. Webb published a case study based on Kenya's diagnosis and treatment. He argued that pyometra should be systematically ruled out in any intact female big cat presenting with organ failure symptoms before a terminal diagnosis is confirmed. The paper was circulated among exotic animal veterinary networks and directly influenced diagnostic checklists at several major wildlife facilities and sanctuaries. Webb estimated that Kenya's case could prevent dozens of premature euthanasia decisions in big cats over the coming decades. Second, it changed Tyson's relationship with his public image. He talked about Kenya's near-death and recovery on his podcast, Hot Boxin' with Mike Tyson, in an episode that went viral, millions of views. And it wasn't the spectacle that drew people in. It was the vulnerability. Here was Iron Mike, the baddest man on the planet, talking openly about crying on a concrete floor over a sick tiger, about canceling everything in his life to sleep on a cot next to an animal, about the moment he thought he was going to have to say goodbye and how it connected to every loss he'd ever suffered: Cuss, his daughter Exodus, his career, his freedom. He didn't perform the emotion, he just let it exist. And people responded to it in a way that surprised everyone, including Tyson. Third, and this is the part that gets me, it changed Webb, the veterinarian who almost made the wrong call. Webb later said in an interview that Kenya's case haunted him for months, not because he'd made a mistake, but because the mistake was so easy to make. He'd been thorough, he'd followed proper diagnostic procedure, and he'd still nearly killed an animal that had a treatable condition. It made him fundamentally rethink how he approached terminal diagnoses. He started building extra verification steps into his practice. He started seeking second opinions more aggressively. He started pausing before delivering bad news, not out of hesitation but out of humility. Because Kenya taught him that certainty is sometimes the most dangerous thing a doctor can feel. And if you've made it this far in this story, if Kenya's fight and Tyson's devotion and Webb's catch meant something to you, then do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Because stories are what we do here, and the next one is already waiting. Now let me finish this. Kenya lived for nearly 2 more years after the surgery. Good years, active years. She ate well, she moved well. She had energy that a tiger her age had no business having, according to every veterinary benchmark. Tyson visited her enclosure every single day he was home. He adjusted his travel schedule to minimize time away. When he had to leave for more than a few days, he had his staff send him daily video updates of Kenya eating, walking, lying in the sun. And on the day she finally did pass, it was quiet, natural. Her heart gave out in her sleep during the early morning hours of a warm spring night. The staff found her lying on her side in her favorite spot, the corner of her enclosure where the morning sun hit first. There was no pain, no struggle, just a tiger who had lived fully, been loved completely, and left on her own terms. Tyson was in New York when he got the call. He flew back to Las Vegas that afternoon. He went into the enclosure alone. He sat with her body for over an hour. When he came out, his eyes were red, but his face was calm. He told Darren one thing: she waited until I wasn't here. She didn't want me to see it. Whether that's true or whether it's a story a grieving man told himself to make the loss bearable, I don't know. But I know this: Mike Tyson loved that tiger in a way that most people never love anything. Not because she was exotic or impressive or valuable, because she was honest. Because when she leaned into him, she meant it. Because in a life full of people who wore masks around him, Kenya never wore one. And Dr. Marcus Webb, the vet who caught the thing that everyone else missed, the man who made one phone call at midnight that changed everything, he kept a photo on his office wall for the rest of his career. It showed Tyson on his knees in the recovery area, arms around Kenya's neck, 4 days after the surgery, both of them alive, both of them fighting, both of them proof that sometimes the ending you accept isn't the ending you're supposed to get. That's the legend: a dying tiger, a desperate man, and a vet who looked one more time when everyone else, including himself, had already looked away. Some people hear this story and think it's about animals. Some think it's about money and access, that only a rich man could afford the team that saved Kenya. And maybe there's truth in that. But the core of it is simpler. The core of it is a man who refused to let go, who sat on cold concrete in the middle of the night talking to a tiger about a dead trainer, who canceled the world because the world didn't matter as much as the thing lying on the floor in front of him, who said do it when every rational calculation said the risk was too high and the odds were too low. Mike Tyson has knocked out champions. He's earned hundreds of millions of dollars. He's been on magazine covers and movie screens and the front page of every newspaper on the planet. But if you ask the people who were there that day, the ones who watched him carry a 400-pound tiger onto a surgical table and then pace concrete for 4 hours waiting to find out if she'd live, they'll tell you the same thing. That was the bravest they ever saw him. Not in a ring, not under lights, not with the whole world watching. In a building in the desert, fighting for something that couldn't fight for itself, with nobody watching at all. That's Mike Tyson. That's Kenya. And that's the story that proved the most dangerous man alive had the softest hands when it mattered most.